I learned I was a grandmother from a photograph that did not have my name on it. It was a Tuesday evening, quiet as most of my evenings are now. I was sitting in my small living room, the lamp beside me throwing that soft yellow light across the carpet my late husband and I picked out 20 years ago. The house was still. My name is Laverne Johnson. I am 72 years old, and I have lived in Birmingham, Alabama all my life. I have buried a husband, raised a son, paid off a mortgage, and kept the same church pew warm for near 40 years. I was not looking for anything in particular that evening. My neighbor's granddaughter had shown me how to scroll on that Facebook thing. Said it was how folks kept up with family these days. I prefer phone calls, but I was trying to keep up. The photograph came up without warning. A tiny baby wrapped in a pale blue blanket. My son standing behind a hospital bed, his hand resting gentle on a woman's shoulder. He looked tired. He looked proud. He did not look toward me. The caption said, "Welcome to the world, our sweet boy." There were little blue hearts, dozens of comments, congratulations, blessings, so happy for you both. I read them slowly, one by one, like they were instructions. Nobody had called me. I checked the date, thinking maybe it was old, maybe I had missed something, but it said posted 2 hours ago. 2 hours. I looked at the time on my wall clock and then back at the screen just to be certain. I remember sitting very still. My thumb hovered over that little picture. I did not click it right away. I felt like if I made it bigger, it would become more real than I was ready for. I had imagined the day I became a grandmother many times. I did not imagine finding out from strangers typing "so happy for you" under a picture I was not invited to see. I have only one child. My son Marcus came into this world after 3 years of trying and one quiet miscarriage I rarely speak about. When the doctor placed him in my arms, I felt like the earth had decided to be kind. I raised him with what I had. His father worked long shifts at the steel plant, and I worked part-time at the elementary school cafeteria. We did not have much money, but our house held laughter, prayer, and discipline in equal measure. I believe love was something you showed every day. Packed lunches, ironed shirts, sitting up late helping with homework even when your eyes were burning. Love was consistency. Loyalty was standing by family even when it was inconvenient. Respect to me meant you did not leave your people guessing. You did not let them hear important news from somebody else. You picked up the phone. You looked them in the eye. You made room for them at the table. Marcus was a quiet child, thoughtful. He would sit on the porch steps with me in the evenings, asking questions about his grandfather he never met. He used to say, "Mama, I'm always going to tell you everything." Children make promises without knowing how heavy time can be. When he went off to college in Atlanta, I cried in the parking lot after I helped him move into that dorm. Not because I doubted him, because I knew the world would start shaping him in ways I could not reach. He met his wife Danielle in his 3rd year. He brought her home one Sunday after church. She was polite, soft-spoken. She called me Miss Johnson and sat with her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for instruction. I remember studying her face that afternoon, not in suspicion, just in curiosity. I wondered what kind of woman she would become in my life. I wondered what kind of mother she might be one day.
I did not know that when that day came, I would be looking at her from a screen instead of across a hospital room.
The first time I felt something shift was small enough to ignore. They had been married almost 2 years when Marcus started calling less. Not dramatically less, just enough that I noticed. Our Sunday evening talks shortened. He would say he was tired. Work had been busy. Danielle needed him for something. I told myself that was natural. A man belongs first to his household once he builds one. That is what I taught him. I did not want to be the kind of mother who competes with her son's wife for attention. There were moments, though, when I would ask a simple question and get an answer that felt rehearsed, when I would mention coming up for a visit and hear a pause on the other end of the line before he said, "Let me check with Danielle." That pause stayed with me. At Thanksgiving one year, Danielle insisted they host instead of coming to Birmingham. I packed a pecan pie and drove up alone. When I arrived, the house was beautiful, everything in its place, everything arranged. But there were small things I noticed. My pie set to the side while her mother's dishes were placed in the center. Conversations that shifted when I walked into the room. Smiles that did not quite reach the eyes. No one was unkind. No one raised a voice. It was just a feeling that I had stepped into a home where my presence required adjustment. I chose patience. I told myself that marriages are delicate in the early years, that young women are protective of their space. I had once been a young wife too. So I watched, and I waited, and I kept my thoughts to myself. When Marcus told me they were trying for a baby, it was during one of those shortened Sunday calls. He said it casually, like he was mentioning a new couch. "We've been thinking about starting a family." I remember gripping the edge of my kitchen counter as he spoke. I said I would be praying for them. After that, updates were sparse. I did not press. I would ask gently, "How's Danielle feeling?" He would answer with one word, "Fine," or "Good." The details stayed on their side of the line. I began to sense that some conversations were happening without me. Doctor appointments I heard about weeks later. Nursery plans mentioned only after they were already in motion. I told myself it was their right. Still, I would sit at night and picture a small crib. I would imagine holding a warm bundle against my chest, humming the same lullabies I sang to Marcus when thunderstorms rattled our windows. One afternoon I called and Danielle answered. Her voice was careful. I asked how she was feeling. She said, "We're handling everything." That word "we" rested heavy in the air. I realized then that I was not part of that we. I hung up and washed the same plate twice, though it was already clean. I told myself I was being sensitive, that distance is a normal part of children growing up, but distance can grow roots if you are not paying attention. The months went by quietly. I did not hear about labor starting. I did not get a late-night call saying, "Mama, we're heading to the hospital." I slept through whatever hour my grandson entered the world. That Tuesday evening when I saw the photograph, I scrolled back up and studied my son's face. He looked older than I remembered. Responsibility will do that to a man. There was joy in his eyes, but I could not find myself reflected there. I tapped on the comments. Danielle's mother had written, "So proud to be in the delivery room with you." I read that line 3 times. Delivery room. She had been there.
I tried to remember if Marcus had ever mentioned a plan for who would be present. I could not recall one. I realized I had assumed I would at least be called. Assumptions are quiet architects of disappointment. I set the phone down on the coffee table and folded my hands in my lap. The house felt different then, larger. The ticking clock sounded louder than it had an hour before. I did not cry right away. I just sat there, listening to the refrigerator hum in the kitchen. I thought about the years I had spent making sure Marcus never felt left out of anything important, and I wondered when I had become someone who could be left out so easily. I did not comment on the photograph. My finger hovered over the space where it said, "Write a comment." I considered typing something simple, "Congratulations," but the word felt thin. It felt like something a distant acquaintance would say. Instead, I closed the application and picked up the phone. I dialed Marcus's number from memory, the same way I have done for decades. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. His recorded voice sounded cheerful. "Hey, you've reached Marcus. Leave a message." I listened to it all the way through, as if there might be something hidden at the end. I did not leave a message. An hour later, my phone chimed. A text. "Hey, Mom. Sorry we didn't call yet. It's been crazy. Baby and Danielle are doing great." That was all. Crazy. That was the word he chose. I typed. I saw the picture. Congratulations. I stared at the screen for a long moment before pressing send. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. His reply came short. "Thanks. We'll call when things settle down." I set the phone face down and went to bed earlier than usual. Sleep did not come easily. Lying in the dark, I let my mind walk backward. I remembered the day Marcus took his first steps across this same living room floor. He wobbled toward me, arms outstretched, trusting I would catch him. I had been there for every milestone, every fever, every school recital. I remembered sitting beside his hospital bed when he had pneumonia at age 7. I refused to leave, even when the nurse said visiting hours were over. I said, "That is my child," and they let me stay. I remembered the night his father passed. Marcus was 23. He cried into my shoulder like he had when he was small. He said, "It's just us now, Mama." I held him and believed that bond was unbreakable. Somewhere between then and now, something had shifted. I turned on the bedside lamp and reached for my Bible, not because I was angry, because I needed steady ground. I read a familiar passage about wisdom and restraint. I closed it and sat quietly. I did not want to harden, but I could feel something inside me tightening. The next morning, I went about my routine. I watered my plants. I swept the front porch. I waved to Mrs. Henderson across the street. Life does not pause for your private discoveries. Still, beneath every ordinary motion was the awareness that I had a grandson I had not been told about. 3 days passed before Marcus called. His voice sounded tired. I could hear a baby crying faintly in the background. That sound did something to me. It was thin and new and full of need. I gripped the arm of my chair. "Hey, Mama," he said. "Sorry we didn't call sooner. It's been a lot." I told him I understood. My voice surprised me. It was steady, even gentle. I asked how Danielle was feeling. He said she was recovering. I asked how the baby was. He said healthy. There was a space where an apology might have fit. It did not come. I waited for him to say, "I'm sorry you found out online." Instead, he began explaining how hectic the hospital had been, how they wanted to focus on bonding time, how they were limiting visitors. Visitors. I let that word pass. When he finished speaking, I said, "Marcus, I would have liked to know from you." That was all. There was a silence on the line. Then he said, "We didn't mean anything by it, Mama. You know that." His tone carried a hint of impatience, like I was complicating something simple. I told him I was glad everyone was safe. We ended the call politely. Polite can be colder than anger. After that conversation, I sat in my chair for a long time. I thought about what he had said. We didn't mean anything by it. I turned that sentence over in my mind like a stone in my hand. Sometimes harm is not loud. Sometimes it comes wrapped in carelessness. I asked myself a hard question. Had I raised a son who believed I could be placed on the outer edge of his life without consequence? It is not easy to examine your own work as a mother. I remember times when I shielded Marcus from discomfort, times when I solved problems for him instead of letting him face them. I wondered if I had taught him that my heart was durable enough to withstand neglect. Danielle remained mostly silent in all of this. She sent a brief text a week later with a picture of the baby's hand wrapped around Marcus's finger. No caption, no greeting. I stared at that tiny hand on my screen. I imagined what it would feel like in my palm. Warm, fragile, real. I realized then that my grief was not only about being excluded. It was about missing the first breath of a new branch on our family tree. And first breaths do not come again. Weeks went by before I was invited to visit. The invitation came not as a warm request, but as a logistical arrangement. "We're ready for short visits now," Marcus said over the phone. "Maybe you can come next Saturday for a couple of hours." A couple hours. I agreed. I packed a small bag with a knitted blanket I had started months ago when I first suspected they were expecting. I had chosen a soft cream color, neutral, patient. The drive to Atlanta felt longer than usual. I watched the road stretch out ahead of me and thought about how many times I had made this trip with excitement in my chest. When I arrived, Danielle opened the door. She smiled politely and stepped aside. The house smelled faintly of baby powder and something sterilized. Everything looked orderly, controlled. Marcus brought the baby into the living room. "Mom, this is Elijah," he said. Elijah. They had chosen a name without asking if it carried history, without wondering if it echoed anyone from our side of the family. I reached out my arms slowly. When they placed him in them, time softened. He was smaller than I expected. His eyelids fluttered but did not open. I held my grandson for the first time in a quiet room that did not feel like it had space for me. As I sat there holding Elijah, I felt two truths at once. The first was simple and undeniable. I loved him. Love did not wait for introductions or apologies. It rose up from somewhere deep and familiar. the same place it had risen when I first held Marcus. The second truth was quieter. I was a guest in this moment. Danielle hovered nearby, adjusting the baby's blanket, even when it did not need adjusting. Marcus kept glancing at the clock on the wall as though measuring something invisible. I spoke softly to Elijah, telling him about the oak tree in my front yard, about the church choir that would one day sing over him if he ever visited Birmingham. I did not know if those visits would come. Danielle mentioned they were keeping his routine very strict. Feeding times, sleep times, limited stimulation. I nodded, though I had raised a child without manuals or apps. When I offered the knitted blanket, Danielle thanked me and placed it neatly on a side chair, not on the baby. I noticed, but said nothing. We took one photograph before I left. Marcus stood beside me, Danielle slightly behind. The baby rested in my arms. Later, when I looked at that picture on my phone, I saw a smile on my face that did not quite reach my eyes. The shift came on an ordinary afternoon, not during a holiday or argument. I had called to ask about visiting again. Marcus hesitated before answering. He said they were trying to establish boundaries. That word again, boundaries. It sounded rehearsed. He explained that they felt overwhelmed by expectations from both sides of the family, that they needed space to build their own traditions without outside influence. Outside influence. I listened carefully. I did not interrupt. Then he said, almost casually, Danielle felt it was better to announce the birth online first so we could control the narrative. Control the narrative. In that moment, something settled into place inside me. It was not anger. It was clarity. I understood then that the Facebook post had not been an oversight. It had been a decision to inform the world before informing me. I thanked him for explaining. My voice remained even. When we hung up, I did not pace, I did not cry. I simply sat down and let the truth take its seat beside me. Admitting the truth to myself was harder than hearing it. I had believed that no matter how marriages shift, no matter how geography stretches, the core bond between mother and child holds steady. I had believed that respect was instinctive when love had been consistent. But respect, I learned, must be practiced in every season. I saw clearly now that I had been moved from the center of my son's life to its perimeter. Not violently, not cruelly, just steadily, carefully. There is a particular kind of grief that comes when you realize you are no longer consulted, only informed. I walked through my house that evening, touching familiar objects. The dining table where Marcus did his homework. The doorway where we marked his height in pencil each birthday. Evidence of a life poured out without reservation. I did not regret the pouring, but I recognized that I could not demand a return. Some illusions fall quietly. They do not shatter, they dissolve. And once dissolved, they cannot be gathered back up the same way. I began to make small changes. I stopped waiting by the phone on Sundays. If Marcus called, I answered warmly. If he did not, I continued with my evening. I joined a weekday Bible study group I had declined before because I was always keeping my schedule open.
I learned how to tend to my own hours again. When pictures of Elijah appeared online, I did not rush to view them. I looked when I was ready. I let myself enjoy what was offered without chasing what was withheld. Danielle and I exchanged polite messages about holidays and birthdays. Nothing sharp, nothing intimate. I did not confront her about the delivery room. I did not ask why her mother stood where I had imagined standing. Some questions, when asked, only deepened the divide. Instead, I focused on the quality of my presence when I was invited. When I visited, I was attentive but not intrusive, loving but not demanding. I refused to compete. There is dignity in knowing when to step back without stepping away entirely. The first time Elijah reached for me on his own was nearly 9 months old. We were sitting on the living room floor in Atlanta. Danielle was in the kitchen, and Marcus was answering emails. Elijah crawled toward me, unsteady but determined. He pulled himself up by gripping my skirt. He looked at me with wide, searching eyes. I did not rush him. I opened my arms slowly. He leaned into me, resting his head against my chest. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. In that moment, there was no Facebook post, no missed phone call, just warmth and breath and a small hand clutching fabric. Danielle returned and watched us. Her expression was unreadable. She said softly, "He doesn't usually go to people like that." I smiled and said, "Sometimes babies recognize something familiar." I did not mean myself. I meant love. And love, when steady, leaves an imprint deeper than announcements ever could. Time continued its steady work. Elijah grew. He began walking. He began speaking small words. Some visits were easier than others. There were still moments when I felt the subtle boundary lines around me, but I no longer mistook them for accidents. Marcus and I had one honest conversation nearly 2 years after that Facebook post. He admitted they had been afraid of being overwhelmed by expectations. He said they wanted to start fresh. I told him gently that starting fresh does not require erasing history. He looked down at his hands when I said that. He did not argue. I did not demand apology. I did not list my sacrifices. I simply let the weight of my words sit between us. Sometimes the most powerful thing a mother can do is speak without raising her voice. He began calling more regularly after that, not perfectly, but intentionally. And intention matters. I have learned that roles change even when love does not. I am no longer the center of my son's world. That is as it should be, but I am not invisible either. I had to decide whether I would shrink into resentment or expand into a new shape. Resentment is heavy. It requires constant feeding. I chose something lighter. I pour into Elijah when I am with him. I tell him stories about his grandfather. I teach him small prayers. I let him see that family is something you tend, not something you manage. Danielle and I are not close in the way I once imagined we might be, but we are civil, sometimes even warm. We have found a rhythm that does not require us to be alike. I no longer measure my worth by how quickly I am informed of things.
Worth at my age must come from within, and within I remain steady.
When I look back on that Tuesday evening, I no longer feel the sharpness I once did. I still remember the sting of seeing my grandson's face on a screen before hearing his cry through a phone. I remember the quiet of my living room and the weight of understanding settling in. But I also remember that love is larger than the moment it is announced. Elijah knows me now, not from a caption, not from a comment, from touch, from voice, from presence. Marcus has grown into his fatherhood in his own way, imperfect, learning, just as I once did. If I could speak to that woman sitting alone with her phone glowing in the dim light, I would not tell her to brace herself. I would tell her this: sometimes you will be the last to know, but if you remain steady, you will not be the least.